It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast presented by DraftKings, the show that's so nice we do it twice. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams, 7 years. Those of you that check us out on DK Network or youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, you can see the helmets, the game balls. I didn't even bother to ask the Browns for my helmet since I didn't play in a regular season game. No, thank you. I will say thank you, though, to having John Daigle as my co-host on this show. So, obviously, we have the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, which is daily. All you need to know about the NFL, 26 minutes or less every single day. The Even Money Betting Podcast, the College Draft Podcast, which is about college football, betting on college football. This is the Fantasy Feast, which is especially relevant this time of year, fantasy playoffs, or those of you playing DFS. John is the man with the plan. John Daigle, at NotJDaigle on social media. EstablishTheRun.com is where you can find all of his other great work. Just make sure you use the code FEAST there so you get the discount. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We're at Ross Tucker Pod, and we greatly appreciate those of you that check us out on audio or youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Give me some, do some of my research for me, John. Let's start episode 2 here with the Patriots and the Cardinals.
Cardinals always a team that's tough to put our fingers on. Even last week, thinking that'll be a low-scoring game, and they come out and they're very effective anyways, at least in terms of fantasy. But in this one, it does seem like it's one where they continue leaning on James Conner. We know the Patriots defense has struggled mightily, in particular in stopping opposing running backs. James Conner once again popped up as an RB1 last week, even getting 4 catches in that game. So I think Conner is my most confident option here among their players. Trey McBride, I know he hasn't scored a receiving touchdown yet, does have 1 rushing, and has fallen onto the ball in the end zone for a fumble recovery touchdown. But now out of their bye, also, Trey McBride has seen double-digit targets in every game. Elite fantasy usage. You could argue the best usage of any fantasy tight end, just hasn't received that receiving touchdown just yet. So Trey McBride still a man among boys out there. For the Patriots, it's a little bit tougher because the wheels haven't come off for Jonathan Gannon's defense. They're still allowing big plays through the air, but they bend and don't break, which is typically what you see when a defensive-minded head coach has less than stellar players, but he has them fit their system perfectly. And it's going to be a bit of a test for Drake May because he's made 7 full starts now, and in those 7 full starts, he's averaging 18.5 fantasy points per game as the QB14, tacking on 4.5 extra points weekly with his legs. And in the 2 games, at least, that we've seen Jonathan Gannon have to play rushing quarterbacks this year, he did allow 39 yards and 2 touchdowns from the ground to Josh Allen, and Jaden Daniels also had 47 yards and a rushing touchdown. So I have a little bit of faith in Drake May's rushing floor here, but overall, where the ball goes to is a bit tougher. We've seen Hunter Henry lead the team with a 19% target share in May's 7 full starts. So that's the player I have the most confidence in. But their wide receivers, even after waiving KJ Osborne midweek this week, their wide receivers are still being rotated in and out, and it's been hard to pinpoint. So I have no idea who's going to stand out among them, quite honestly, except for Hunter Henry.
Love it. Very much looking forward to it. What about for the Colts and the Broncos? Big game for those 2 teams. The Colts are chasing the Broncos.
And both teams healthy now. Broncos coming out of their bye, and it is going to be interesting because this total at DraftKings Sportsbook continues going up. And I do wonder if the Colts return here, also coming out of their bye. Still waiting out word on Josh Downs, whether he's going to play or not. But I do wonder if they have something schemed coming out and ready to take on Broncos defense that, although they have early on at least, had limited good quarterbacks. They just hadn't played a extremely tough schedule just yet. And so we're still questioning, okay, is this an all-pro defense that can get them into the next round of the playoffs, or is it one that is still going to leak big plays? And against Anthony Richardson, you just never know. He was playing significantly better through the air before their bye, still left some plays on the table, but at least his terms of throwing downfield was getting much better. And then also it's a plus matchup for how Anthony Richardson plays, because the Broncos are running the 6th highest rate of man coverage, and all these guys who are going to him in the field. Alex Pierce, 23 yards per catch against man, because as a 6'2 wide receiver running downfield, of course, if you leave him one-on-one, he can make contested catches, as he did at Cincinnati. A.D. Mitchell out of Texas actually leads the league in targets against man coverage, because, again, if you leave a big guy running downfield one-on-one, Anthony Richardson will find him and give him a chance. So I think there is some faith here for the Colts offense, in particular through the air. I like Anthony Richardson as a streaming option if you're in the first round of playoffs, especially because we think he can give us that rushing upside. And on the other side of the ball, the Broncos offense had just been clicking before their bye over the last month. Like, I understand Bo Nix struggled through the air against the Browns defense, and we even talked about that on this show, expected that to happen, because like the one thing the Browns do well is they get pressure, literally leading the league in pressure rate, and Bo Nix, although he had improved, is still struggling against pressure. But that's not the case against the Colts. The Colts still struggle to get pressure on you, and Sean Payton otherwise has schemed an amazing game plan. We've even seen Marvin Mims involved over the past month. 7 touches, and then 53 yards and a touchdown, 42 yards, and then the past time we saw the Broncos offense, that big 80-yard touchdown on the day, 4 catches, 109 yards, and a receiving score. So I still love the Broncos offense to also carry their weight in this game. I think it could be a lot higher scoring than perceived.
Love it. The Colts need to win that game, let's be honest, to make the playoffs. All right. What about arguably the game of the day? It's the Bills, it's the Lions. I'm expecting fireworks, John. Are you?
We talked about last week how it would perhaps be a letdown for the Bills offense, given that their 2 games before that, it was the Super Bowl, their Super Bowl, against the Chiefs in Kansas City, needed to prove that they could beat Patrick Mahomes, headed into the playoffs, and then, of course, a primetime game in the snow against the Niners where they could clinch the division. And then they were traveling across the country to play the Rams. It's an entirely different spot. But the Bills this year, their letdown is 40-plus points, and literally the most fantasy points ever by a quarterback, with 52, depending on your scoring format, from Josh Allen. The Lions also lead the league 45% of their snaps from man coverage. And Josh Allen against man this year, a league-high 16 touchdowns to only 2 picks. I'm expecting a massive day from Josh Allen indoors against this Lions defense that otherwise has been good, but we see now that the Bills offense is just in a different universe this year. And so they're going to be one similar to the Lions offense, to where no matter what you do well, they can just scheme a way around it and get their points wherever necessary. So love Josh Allen to Khalil Shakir here. We have to wait out and see whether we get both Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid back in this game. Otherwise, Amari Cooper, we saw him pop up last week. His best game with the Bills so far, a player I'm excited to start this week in this potential Super Bowl preview. The one player I think it's going to be a little bit tougher for the Bills is James Cook, because the Lions' run defense, I don't think people probably realized it because Josh Jacobs scored 3 touchdowns last week on Thursday night. But since week 10, they're allowing just 2.8 yards per carry to running backs. And even Josh Jacobs, those 3 touchdowns accounted for 73% of his fantasy points. He basically did nothing else otherwise. And for Josh Allen also, this defense did leak 61 yards to Anthony Richardson and 39 yards to Caleb Williams rushing. So still love Josh Allen and all their options through the air. A bit more scared about James Cook. Want to put him as more as an RB3 or RB4 for this week. For the Lions, I mean, you're not stopping Ben Johnson and Jared Goff right now. We talked about how the Bills defense last week had only allowed 18 fantasy points to a quarterback one time all year, and it was Lamar Jackson, and that's only because he rushed for 50 yards and a touchdown. And then Matthew Stafford comes out of nowhere, at home, indoors, and tosses for over 300 yards and multiple touchdowns. Maybe that's beginning of a trend. Maybe that's the beginning of a leak for the Bills secondary. I highly doubt it. But either way, we know that in these type of games, Dan Campbell still loves to and get his physicality on paper. And that's how he puts his impression on the game. And that's where the Bills have still struggled, allowing 4.7 yards per carry to opposing running backs. So both Dave Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs, you can start with confidence in the first round of the fantasy playoffs and continue getting both Amon-Ra St. Brown and Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta now, who's had over 15% of the team's targets in 4 consecutive games since returning from injury. Sam Laporta, who also is trending towards a tight end 1 as well again, too.
That game, by the way, pretty much the Labatt Blue Light Bowl.
Insane.
Because that's what Bills fans drink, and that's what a lot of Lions fans drink. So you should do the same. If you're going to have some beers while you're watching that game, drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends or family, heck, by yourself. I don't care. You're not by yourself. You're watching the game. Living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, next up, Bucks Chargers, which is kind of going under the radar for these late games because some of these other better ones, but still a pretty darn good game in its own right.
And the Chargers' schedule has been all over the place. Some bottom feeders and then some elite teams like playing Derrick Henry and the Ravens, for example, who got the best of them. So it's just really tough to gauge their defense on paper to an opposing offense. But we have seen the Bucks clicking out of their bye since getting Mike Evans back, especially last week. I know Mike Evans is not the one that ultimately gets there in fantasy. That was instead Jalen McMillan, who I do think everyone should pick up ahead of the fantasy playoffs, because just think about in terms of the Bucks offense without Chris Godwin, they can't keep using Sterling Shepard, for example, as their wide receiver 2, a tremendous chain mover and possession receiver from the slot, but they still need down play ability that Godwin provided. And Jalen McMillan, their third-round rookie, the Bucks, we saw him finally with a season-high 25% target share, 50 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns this past week, including in the fourth quarter where they're designed to screen for him. He gets upfield for a 29-yard receiving score. So I do think this could be the emergence of Jalen McMillan as a potential wide receiver 3 or flex for fantasy in the playoffs. Love adding him in both 12 and 14 team leagues. The backfield's a little tougher because Bucky Irvin tried to play through his hip/back injury, and by the second quarter, he had his helmet on the sideline and he was wearing a heating pad on his back. Todd Bowles came out on Monday and said that Bucky's back tightened up and he will only play if, quote, they can loosen it up by Sunday. So if Bucky Irving is out, although we have seen Sean Tucker pop up in the past in week 6 when Rachaad White missed time and Sean Tucker stepped up as the RB2 behind Bucky Irving, it was actually Tucker who finishes the overall RB1. Not a top 12 option, the overall RB1 in fantasy. So he's proven he can break fantasy football if he gets playing time. The thing is, when Bucky Irving left this past game, it was all Rachaad White. 16 touches to Tucker's 3. And I think that may be because Tucker had that goal line fumble a couple weeks ago, and the Bucs are a team that are not only atop, but about to compete to clinch the division. And so they can't have minor mistakes like that. I wonder if they trust Sean Tucker. So either way, you're playing Rachaad White in this game, but if you're desperate for a flex option and you happen to sneak into the last seed of the playoffs and you just need someone, I do think Tucker, while volatile, could provide that juice, assuming Bucky Irving doesn't play in this game. For Justin Herbert and the Bucs, though, yes, the Bucs defense played well last week, but they stifled a pass defense that we'll talk about in a bit when we get to the Monday night games. Aiden O'Connell, we thought would have a much better performance, but the Bucs kept him under duress, and the Raiders really struggled through the air. Probably not the same for Justin Herbert again, because they tried to get too cute in running the ball. Jim Harbaugh did on Sunday night, and that's what led to their first half disaster. But in this one, assuming Ladd McConkey's back, who nearly played on Sunday night, then I expect Justin Herbert to have a successful day. Even if you're looking for a streaming option at tight end, Stone Smart popped up in place of Will Dissly. Dissly, who's going to mix the next couple of games, was targeted 3 times on 12 routes for 54 receiving yards. The Bucs have allowed at least 12.5 fantasy points to tight end ones in 6 of their last 7 games. So I love sneaking Stone Smart in there. And for the Chargers running game, it's just tough because they have no juice. Gus Edwards hasn't reached double-digit fantasy points in any start for J.K. Dobbins so far, and his 2 touchdowns these last 3 games have accounted for 57% of his fantasy production because he's been an inefficient runner with just 3.1 yards per carry. So I would drop Gus Edwards for Kamani Vidal, the 6th-round rookie everywhere, and just cross your fingers and stashing Vidal for the fantasy playoffs, hoping that he emerges because he's the only one in this backfield who has a potential ceiling, until J.K. Dobbins returns.
Next up, it's the battle for my beloved Keystone State. Steelers, Eagles. Is this a squeaky wheel game for A.J. Brown now, John?
Brandon Graham coming out in the media and saying the quiet part out loud. Not supposed to say that A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts are having personal issues and not friends anymore. And maybe that's why we've seen A.J. Brown struggle in terms of targets, even Devonta Smith being the one get there with the receiving score last week. It's a chess match game. Because it is, for whatever we think about both these teams, it is a potential Super Bowl preview. And so it's a game where I expect to be lower scoring based on what these defenses are doing. George Pickens not going to play this game, already listed doubtful on Tuesday, which tells you that he's going to miss time with that grade 2 hamstring injury. And the options behind them are just lacking explosiveness, lacking confidence from Russell Wilson, who is otherwise a deep shot artist. It is Van Jefferson, who does pop up for 1 catch and a touchdown, but not someone who's really stuck around. Mike Williams and Calvin Austin against this Eagles defense that, out of their bye, is still allowing a league-low 5.5 yards per attempt. Kenyon Mitchell for the Eagles, out of their bye, hasn't allowed 30 receiving yards to any player in coverage in that time. And so I do think it's going to be a lower-scoring game where Russell Wilson will struggle through the air with these backup group of receivers. For the Eagles, it's a bit tougher, too, because, as we talked about last week, the Pittsburgh defense has been one that's entirely indifferent when Alex Highsmith has been on the field, leading the league in pressure rate when Highsmith is out there to be on the opposite end of the line across from TJ Watt. So I think as this Eagles offense continues to lean into the running game, and that includes Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley, it's one that just the passing volume in general will continue to lack because they are doing something really well, and there's no need to go back to the other version. You should start A.J. Brown in fantasy playoffs for sure. But again, I do think it's going to be a lower scoring chess match where both of these defenses are really good and thus limiting the prowess of the other offenses.
Got it. All right, I think that's fair. What about the Sunday night game? It is the Green Bay Packers, Seattle Seahawks, a very meaningful Sunday night game too.
The Seahawks had been clicking in their run defense too, but now the last couple of weeks they've been banged up, and they have allowed an RB1, including last week to James Conner. So although it seemed, a couple weeks ago, a look-ahead spot for Josh Jacobs, that it may be tougher, we're seeing Josh Jacobs practically be an every down back, the team leaning on him. He's shedding missed tackles constantly. So I still think you can start Josh Jacobs here. It's a little bit tougher in their passing game. We're waiting on word for Romeo Doubs. Not sure if he's cleared the concussion protocol just yet. And at least without him, the past couple of games, we've seen both Jayden Reed. I know Jayden Reed struggled on Thursday night, just 1 target. But Christian Watson popped up for a team high 36% target share, went over 100 yards receiving. And then Dontavian Wicks really fall in line as a wide receiver 3 or 4 if you're desperate without Doubs. It's really just the fact that the passing game has struggled and not been as explosive without Doubs out there, without their full helping of players. And so we do have a little more confidence as Doubs is able to play against the Seattle secondary. For the Seahawks, speaking of banged up receivers, Jackson Smith-Njigba has led DK Metcalf in receiving yards since Metcalf returned from his own injury a few weeks ago. And I think it may be probably because he's a little bit limited and returning from injury. Having said that, you're still going to start him. The Packers defense, yes, has been better. Yes, the Lions took advantage of that by running the ball heavily against them. And so maybe we see Zach Charbonnet get involved here. Charbonnet, who popped up as an RB1. Seattle actually ran the most counter plays they've ever run in that game to appease for their offensive line that's otherwise struggled to create gaps for both Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet to run through. And so maybe that's how they figured out in the second half of the season, this last month, that they can be a better running team. It's just by continuing to run more counters until teams figure it out. But Charbonnet, assuming Kenneth Walker remains out, it doesn't sound good for Sunday night, continues to trend as an RB1 in this game. And Jackson Smith and Jigba, the wide receiver one, in my opinion, over DK Metcalf rest of season, at least while Metcalf is still trying to struggle through this injury.
I was thoroughly impressed by Charbonnet watching that video. I mean, he was impressive. Anything else on that game?
Well, remember for Charbonnet too, because last year he had 3 starts in place of Kenneth Walker. It didn't do well, but if you zoom out and look at the schedule, it was against 3 top-tier run defenses, including the Lions, actually. But remember, this is a 5-star recruit under Jim Harbaugh to Michigan, who then only transferred to UCLA under Chip Kelly because Harbaugh was using him in a timeshare and he felt like he deserved more. And under Chip Kelly, he was an every down running back with over 130 yards from scrimmage per game. Charbonnet is a very, very good player with all-star chops. He just plays behind also a very good player in Kenneth Walker, which makes me wonder too, when Walker returns, maybe it's not this week, I do wonder if they go to more of a tandem backfield because, again, when Charbonnet gets the opportunities, he's very good.
It is the holiday season, which means it's time to hang out with family and friends, drink Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. So many opportunities this year to make football games even more delicious as you watch them. We already had Thanksgiving and Black Friday. Now we've got Christmas, these Saturday games coming up. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff #21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, we do game days. Let's get to the Monday night games. Bears against the Vikings.
Vikings and Brian Flores' blitzing scheme, blitzing at the league's highest rate, are coming for Caleb Williams. But since Thomas Brown took over as a play caller in the Bears' last 4 games, Caleb Williams against the blitz in that time, 6th in completion rate for 8.5 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, 0 turnovers. I don't know if anyone knows this, but Caleb Williams actually hasn't thrown an interception since week 6. He's been very cautious with the ball, despite fumbling last week on a strip sack that he didn't see coming from his blind side. So Caleb Williams, I do think this is a better spot than perceived. Indoors, I expect it to be a higher scoring game, despite being between divisional opponents. And that's great news for Rome Odunze. Gets there in garbage time, 2 touchdowns in the second half last week, whenever everything was already blown out of proportion and the 49ers led by 4 scores. But still, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen trending as their wide receivers who are top 2 in targets since Thomas Brown took over. I like all of these players, honestly, for the Bears passing game to get there. And speaking of loving passing games to get there, I mean, Sam Darnold, giving the Vikings a reason to give him a Geno Smith or Baker Mayfield type contract this offseason, despite drafting J.J. McCarthy in the first round this year, because Sam Darnold continues just understanding the scheme and playing out of this world. And for as great as the Bears defense had been previously, this is now the second game in a row, if you include Brock Purdy last week over 300 yards, where they've really fallen apart, both in terms of getting pressure and containing opposing passing games. So once again, Darnold, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison have to love him in this game.
Last but not least, Falcons Raiders. I don't know that we know who the Raiders quarterback will be. And right or wrong, I guess we know it'll be Kirk Cousins for Atlanta. I'm stunned by that, John. I really am.
Yeah, remember, they're just 1 game back from the division behind the Bucs. And this is still Kirk Cousins, a quarterback that they committed over $100 million to. It's hard to get out from that. They drafted Michael Penix, top 10. Everyone remembers that very heated selection. But I personally don't think you can throw Penix into the fire just yet, just because Kirk Cousins at least gotten you there. Having said that, has it been bad for Kirk Cousins? Oh, yeah. 0 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in his last 4 games, which is the worst ratio in the Super Bowl era in a 4-game stretch. It's been miserable. So although it's a softer Raiders defense that can't rush the passer, and that's been Kirk Cousins' bugaboo, is that he can't move off that recovering leg. And so if you can get to him, he will crumble. But like, do I have faith in Kirk Cousins in this spot? No, I'm still very tepid about it. So you can start him in Superflex leagues, but in an otherwise what should be QB1 spot, you can't think about it that way for Kirk Cousins. You can only start Drake London and Bijan Robinson. Yes, Tyler Algier vultures a touchdown inside the 10-yard line last week, but Bijan Robinson still finished as an overall RB1, or a top 12 option, not the overall RB1. So those are the 2 guys I am still starting with Darnell Mooney for the Falcons offense. For the Raiders offense, it's a little bit tougher because we should be able to say with ease under any other coach, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers. It's that simple. But what we saw from the Raiders last week is that they ran 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets on 67% of their snaps, the highest mark for any team this season. And that's why Michael Mayer popped up for a match, a team high, 7 targets with Jacoby Myers. So you're still starting Brock Bowers. But Antonio Pierce, and even taking Bowers off the field on 2 3rd and 2 situations last week, including 1 inside the red zone, like Pierce is underusing and undervaluing what Bowers can do. And so if Bowers has those letdown games, unfortunately, it's just something we should expect, even though we continue starting him under Pierce. And quickly, a shout out for undrafted free agent Sincere McCormick, who has emerged as the team starting running back. 15 to 17 running back touches last week. Even if Alexander Mattison were to return in this game, I think McCormick is an RB2 in this spot.
So happy for him. Love when guys take advantage of that opportunity. Check him out on social, at @NotJDaigle. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Hope you guys advance this week or have fun playing DFS. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.